Okay, this video goes with the 4-6 Mathematical Literacy and Vocabulary Reveal worksheet. So in this one, the scenario is that these reasons were on note cards, but the order is off. So we want to write the steps in order. So this is a 7-step proof. So let's kind of brainstorm on this a little bit. So we want to prove that EB, let me mark this, EB is congruent to DB. Ultimately, that's what we want to prove. So let's see what we can do to get at this. So what we want to do is we want to draw these triangles separate from each other and label them. And this first one's A, E, D, and this other one is E, C, D. So we have our two triangles. AED is congruent to CDE, AED congruent to CDE. These two angles are given to us as being congruent to each other. And AE is congruent to CD. So A to E is congruent to C to D. So that's the given information that we have. So we can see that between these two triangles, ED is the common side that's shared between both of those. So that's going to let us say that those are congruent, which means these two triangles are going to be congruent by side angle side. By corresponding parts, then, like we go to this angle here, like this, these are the parts we want to get congruent. So now I'm going to do something about trying to prove that those two triangles are congruent. So we've already got that this is congruent. By corresponding parts, we can get angle A congruent to angle C. And what else can we do? We're in this smaller triangle here. Okay, now so if we look at these two triangles, we've already got that these A and C are going to be congruent because of corresponding parts of congruent triangles. And here we have two vertical angles. This angle ABE and this angle CBD are going to be congruent because these are vertical angles. That's going to give us an A. Here we have an A for these angles, and here we have an S. So we have A, S. So these two triangles are going to be congruent because of angle, side. And then once these are congruent, EB and BD are going to be congruent because those are corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So CPC, TC. So let's see what order. Probably the best way to do these is I'm going to number these like A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and then we're going to put them in the correct order. So let's see. First off, we need to prove that these two larger triangles are congruent to each other because that's what we need. That's what we need to do the angles being congruent. So let's look and see what we got here. Let me move up. So first thing we want to do is use our givens. So let's see what we have. We are given that AED is congruent to this, and AE is congruent to CD. That's our given. That's the first step we need to use. So E is going to be in our first step. Okay, so we've got those two pieces congruent to each other. So that gives us an angle and a side. We need another. So we have a side and an angle with a side and an angle. ED is congruent to both triangles. Like we expand them out. Here's the ED side in both of them. So ED is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. That's C, that's our second step. So C goes in for our second step. Okay, now that we have those congruent, we actually have a side angle side pattern that proves that those triangles are congruent to each other. So that's going to be G. So G tells us that these two triangles are congruent by side angle side. Then since those triangles are congruent, these two angles are going to be congruent. Angle A is going to be congruent to angle C because of corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So we're going to get that in there because now we're focused on getting these two smaller triangles congruent, so these can be congruent by corresponding parts. So focused on this little triangle here, because the two triangles are congruent, the A and the C angles are corresponding parts. So that's going to give us an F for step 3. Okay, now that we have that, we need to also, so we got, let me mark this. So right now in the small triangles, we've got that this angle and this angle are congruent because those are corresponding parts of those two big triangles. These two sides are already marked as congruent. So we get an angle on the side. The other thing we can see is that if we can show that these two angles are congruent because these are vertical angles, then that's going to give us an angle side pattern. So that's the next thing we need to do, is to show that, or bring out that these vertical angles are congruent to each other. So that's going to be B.
What do you mean you're fighting?
So B brings those two angles congruent because of vertical angles. And once these are congruent, we have an angle side pattern that proves that these two smaller triangles are congruent. So AEB is going to be congruent to CDB. AEB congruent to CBD. This one here by angle side. So D is going to be our next step. And now that we have these two smaller triangles congruent to each other by angle side, EB and DB are going to be congruent to each other because they are the corresponding parts of those two triangles. So that's our last step. EB congruent to DB because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So let's move up. That's going to be A. And that's the correct order for the steps in this proof.